The nurse didn't cry. She didn't drop anything or rush out of the room. She just went very still, the way water goes still right before it freezes. She read the line on the chart one more time, then she set it face down on the counter, and she turned to look at my grandson. He was 7 years old, sitting on the exam table in his dinosaur socks, swinging his legs like he didn't have a care in the world. Then she looked at me. "Sir." Her voice came out measured, careful, the voice of someone choosing every word before they release it. "How long has Marcus been having these headaches?" Marcus didn't look up. He was studying a poster on the wall about hand washing, tracing the steps with his eyes like it was the most interesting thing he'd seen all week. I looked at the side of his face, that soft jaw, those heavy eyelids, and I said the only honest thing I had. "I don't know," I said. "That's what I'm here to find out." Welcome, friends and family, to a story about paying attention, about what happens when one small voice says something that doesn't fit, and one old man decides to listen. Get comfortable. This is going to take a minute, and I promise you, it's worth every one of them. Let me back up about 3 hours. My name is Frank Delgado. I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years with the Chicago Transit Authority, the last 12 of those as a maintenance supervisor. I know how to read a system. I know how to look at something that's running and feel, not just see. Feel when something underneath is starting to go wrong. That's not a talent. That's decades. And it doesn't turn off just because you hang up your badge. My son, Raphael, had called me the Wednesday before to ask if I could take Marcus for a long weekend. His wife, Celeste, had a work conference in Phoenix, and he had a project deadline that was going to have him at the office until 9 or 10 every night. "Pop, I hate to ask," he said. He always says that. He doesn't hate to ask. He just likes to acknowledge that I have a life, which I appreciate even when it isn't entirely accurate. "Don't apologize," I told him. "Send me the boy." Raphael dropped Marcus off at my place in Pilsen Friday evening, around 6:30. Marcus came through the door, dragging his backpack and carrying a plastic bag of library books, which told me everything I needed to know about where his head was at. Smart kid. Always has been. Gets that from his grandmother, rest her soul. He seemed fine Friday. Normal. We ate tamales, watched half a nature documentary about deep-sea fish before he fell asleep on the couch. I carried him to the guest room. No different from a dozen other weekends. Saturday was when I noticed it. We were at the kitchen table around 9 in the morning, Marcus with his cereal, me with my coffee, and I asked him if he wanted to go to the Science Museum in the afternoon. He loves that place. Has since he was 4. The minute I say the word museum, usually his whole face changes. This time, he just shrugged. One shoulder, slow. "I don't know, Grandpa. My head kind of hurts." I set down my coffee. "Since when?" He stirred his cereal. "A while. A while like this morning, or a while like longer than that." He looked up at me then, and there was something behind his eyes that didn't belong on a Saturday morning at a kitchen table. Not pain exactly. Something more like heaviness. Like he was carrying something a 7-year-old should not be carrying. "Longer," he said. Then he looked back at his cereal. I didn't push it. I filed it. That's the thing about being the kind of man I am. I don't react out loud. I react inside, where it counts, and I stay quiet on the outside until I know what I'm reacting to. We stayed home that day. I let him read his library books. He napped in the afternoon, almost 2 full hours, which I told myself could be normal. Kids grow, kids get tired, kids get headaches. But that evening, while he was in the bathroom brushing his teeth, I went through his backpack, not to snoop. Because I am a grandfather who pays attention, and something was vibrating wrong, and I needed to know what I was feeling in the wheel before I said a word to anyone. There was a permission slip for a field trip, unsigned. A spelling test with a note from his teacher. "Marcus has seemed distracted lately. Please reach out when you get a chance." Dated 2 weeks ago. I turned it over. No response on the back. No sign that anyone had seen it. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, and I stood in the hallway outside the bathroom, listening to him hum something while he brushed, and I thought about that note, 2 weeks. His teacher had tried to flag something 2 weeks ago, and that paper had been sitting in a 7-year-old's backpack ever since. Sunday morning he woke up with the headache again. This time I asked him, gently, if anything was bothering him. Not his head. Anything. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I didn't push. I just waited. I've found, in 64 years of being alive and the last 23 of being a grandfather, that children will tell you what they need to tell you if you give them enough silence to find the words. He was looking at the tablecloth when he said it. Grandpa, do you think it's normal if your eyes hurt when you wake up? Like, every day? I kept my voice completely easy. Every day, buddy? He nodded. Mom says it's because I read too much before bed. But I don't always read before bed. Has your dad seen a doctor about it? He shook his head. Mom says it's not worth bothering the doctor for something small. Something small. I looked at my grandson's face, at the shadows under his eyes that I'd been noticing since Friday and telling myself were normal, at the way he was picking at his breakfast like eating required more energy than he had. And something in my chest went very cold and very certain at the same time. Hey, Marcus. I kept my voice light. What do you say you and me take a little drive this morning? I want to show you something. What is it? It's a surprise. Finish your juice first. He reached for his glass, and I watched him drink it, and I made a mental note. He'd brought that juice from home. Celeste had packed it. Small bottle, purple cap, some kind of fruit blend. He'd had one Friday night and one Saturday morning, and this one made 3. I hadn't thought anything of it. I was starting to think things now. There's a pediatric urgent care clinic on West Cermak that I'd taken Marcus to twice before, once for a bad fall and once for a fever that Raphael had panicked about at 11 on a Thursday night. The doctor there, a woman named Dr. Yolanda Torres, was straightforward, unflappable, and had never once given me the look that says, "You're overreacting, Grandpa." She took me seriously. That matters more than people think. I called my neighbor Harriet before we left. She's 71, semi-retired, and has watched Marcus for me half a dozen times without ever needing to be asked twice. Harriet, I'm going out for a couple of hours. If anything comes up, can I reach you? She said yes, before I finished the sentence. Good woman. I buckled Marcus into the back seat of my Buick, told him we were going to make a quick stop first, before the surprise. He didn't complain. He put his head against the window and watched the street go by, which was the thing that scared me the most. A 7-year-old on a Sunday morning with nowhere to be should not be that still. I told Dr. Torres everything. Not in a panic, not dramatically. I sat across from her in that small exam room with the cartoon frogs painted on the wall, and I laid it out plainly. The headaches every morning, the eye pain, the fatigue, the teacher's note nobody had answered, the shrug instead of the science museum. I told her what Marcus had said about his mother, telling him it wasn't worth bothering the doctor. She listened. She didn't interrupt. Then she went to Marcus, who was sitting on the table eating a granola bar she'd given him, and she examined him quietly and carefully for about 15 minutes. Then she came back to me. I want to run a full blood panel, she said. I'd also like to check his blood pressure. It's slightly elevated for his age, and that can contribute to headaches. And I want a urine screen. She paused. Has he been under any unusual stress at home? I don't know, I said honestly. I have him on weekends. She nodded once. Let's see what the numbers tell us. We waited. Marcus finished his granola bar and asked if I had anything to read, so I found him a magazine about dinosaurs from the rack on the wall, and he settled in like it was a library. I sat next to him and I thought about Raphael. About how many times I'd called in the last few months and noticed that his voice sounded thinner than usual, stretched in the wrong direction. He'd said once, offhand, that things at home were a lot right now, and I hadn't pressed. I told myself it was his marriage, his business. I had learned a long time ago not to put my fingers in my son's household. I was starting to wonder if I'd kept them out too long. Dr. Torres came back carrying the results. She read through the page, and then she went still, the way I described at the beginning, still and careful, and she set it down, and she looked at me. Mr. Delgado, she said, Marcus is showing elevated levels of acetaminophen, consistent with regular, above recommended doses over a prolonged period. I heard the words. I let them land. Children's Tylenol, she continued, is safe at the correct dose for a fever or pain management. But what I'm looking at suggests he's been receiving this consistently, whether he had a fever or not. She paused. At repeated elevated doses over time, it can cause exactly what he's been experiencing: headaches, eye sensitivity, fatigue. And over a longer period, if it continues, there are more serious concerns. I looked at Marcus, who was turning a page of his dinosaur magazine, completely unaware that the room had just changed. "Is he at risk right now?" I asked. My voice was steady. My hands were flat on my knees. "Not immediately. His liver function is flagging but not critical. We caught this at the right time." She set down the chart. "Mr. Delgado, I need to ask you directly. Do you have any reason to believe this was being administered intentionally?" I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was that I didn't know yet. But the thing that was vibrating in my chest said something different than I didn't know. It said, "You already know, Frank. You've known since Saturday morning. You just needed the number on the page." "I don't have proof," I said carefully. "Not yet." She nodded. "I'm required to flag this with DCFS. I want you to understand that, so there are no surprises." "I understand. Can I ask for a little time?" 24 hours. 20. She studied me for a moment. Whatever she saw, a grandfather sitting very still, not angry, not unraveling, just thinking carefully, must have told her something useful. 24 hours, she said. "After that, I make the report regardless." "That's fair." "Thank you." I carried Marcus out to the car with a stop at the front desk for some paperwork, and I buckled him in, and I told him the surprise was ice cream, and I watched his face do that thing, that real thing, the wide-open thing that I needed to see to remember what we were actually fighting for. He ordered a double scoop of mint chip and talked for 20 minutes straight about the deep-sea fish documentary from Friday. I sat across from him in that plastic booth and I listened to every single word, and I laughed at all the right places, and the whole time the paper in my jacket pocket was sitting against my chest like a coal. I dropped Marcus back at Harriet's, told her I had an errand, and said he could watch television and I'd be back inside 2 hours. She said fine, and offered him a cookie, which settled that entirely. I drove back to Pilsen and I sat in my parked car in front of my house for 11 minutes without going inside. I needed to think the way I used to think when a train system was down, and I had to figure out the sequence before I sent anyone in. What do I know? What don't I know yet? And what order do I need to work through this in? What I knew: my grandson had been receiving regular doses of children's acetaminophen in amounts that didn't match any documented illness. What I didn't know: who was administering it, how long it had been happening, and why. The why was what I needed most, because without the why, I couldn't build anything that would hold up in front of a judge or in front of my son. Because Raphael was the conversation I was most afraid of. Not because he wouldn't believe me, because he would be devastated in a way that could make him react wrong. And if he reacted wrong before the evidence was complete, it could hurt Marcus more than help him. I went inside. I called a family attorney named Patricia Okafor, who had handled Beverly's estate 7 years ago and whose card I'd kept in my filing cabinet under important "don't lose." It was a Sunday, so I left a voicemail explaining the situation calmly and completely and asked her to call me first thing Monday. Then I opened my laptop and I looked up the name of a private investigator I'd heard mentioned twice at the retirement lunch for a colleague who'd gone through a bad divorce. His name was Dennis Varga, and he had a website that said, "Thorough, discreet results." I sent him an email. Then I called Raphael, not to tell him everything. I wasn't ready for that yet, and neither was he. "Hey, Pop." He sounded tired. It was 7:30 on a Sunday, and he sounded like a man who had been tired for longer than this weekend. "Hey, son. Marcus is doing great. Listen, how long until Celeste is back from Phoenix?" "Wednesday morning. Can I keep him a few extra days? He's having a good time, and honestly I could use the company." A pause. "Yeah, of course. He loves being with you. You sure it's not too much?" "Raphael. The boy is 7. He eats cereal and reads about dinosaurs. I can manage." He laughed a little, the first real sound I'd heard from him in a while. "All right, Pop. Call me if you need anything." "You know I will." I hung up, and I went and looked in on Marcus, who was asleep in the guest room with his library book open on his chest. I lifted it off him, put it on the nightstand, and I stood in that doorway for a long time. Then I went to the kitchen table, and I opened the notebook I use for maintenance logs, the the one I've used since the CTA days, and I started writing. Everything Dr. Torres had told me. Everything Marcus had said over the past 2 days. The teacher's note, the date on it, the fact that no one had responded, the packed juice from home. All of it, in order, in my own handwriting, with times and dates on every line. If I was going to hand my son something that would rearrange his entire life, it was going to be something he could not talk himself out of. Dennis Varga called me back Monday morning at 8:15. I'd already made coffee and gone through the notebook twice. He sounded like a man who had heard everything and was surprised by nothing, which in that moment was exactly what I needed. We met at a diner on South Halsted at 9. I brought the medical report and the notebook. He brought a legal pad and a pen and ordered black coffee and didn't touch it for 45 minutes while I talked. When I finished, he looked at his notes. You said the juice came from home. She packed it specifically. Every time. Has Marcus been sick recently? Any documented illness that would explain ongoing Tylenol? Nothing I've heard about. And the teacher's note said he seemed distracted, not sick. Dennis tapped his pen on the pad. Mr. Delgado, what I'm hearing is a pattern. What I need to establish is intent and duration. That means pharmacy records, purchase history, and a look at whether anyone in that household has an unusual relationship with this particular medication. He paused. There's also the question of motive. I've been sitting with that question since Sunday. What's your read? I thought about how to say it. My son works long hours. He travels. Celeste stays home with Marcus since they moved to Naperville 18 months ago. Before that, she had a career in marketing. Good one. I paused. She gave it up when they moved. Said she wanted to focus on Marcus. Dennis was quiet. I don't think Marcus has been a priority, I said carefully. I think he's been an obstacle. Dennis nodded once, slowly. Give me 48 hours. He called me Wednesday afternoon, while Marcus was at the kitchen table building a model of a T-Rex from a kit we'd bought at the craft store. He said, I've got something. Can you come in tomorrow morning? What time? 8. I'll be there. I made sure Marcus was set for the morning. I'd arranged with Harriet to come over at 7:30 and stay until I was back, and I told Marcus I had a doctor's appointment of my own, which was the kind of thing grandfathers say that children accept without question. He looked up from his T-Rex and said, Don't forget to drink water, Grandpa. I told him I wouldn't. Dennis slid a folder across the desk at 8 the next morning. Inside, pharmacy receipts. 7 months of them. Children's acetaminophen. Purchased in rotating patterns at 4 different pharmacies, across 2 zip codes. Never the same store, twice in a row. The amounts and the timing Dennis had mapped them lined up with Raphael's travel schedule. Every time Raphael left for more than 2 nights, a purchase appeared in the records within 24 hours. There were also screenshots. Not of an affair, I want to be clear about that, because this story is different from the ones you might have heard before. What Dennis had found was worse in its own particular way. Celeste had a private social media account that she ran under a different name, a parenting account. She posted about Marcus constantly, his chronic fatigue, his mystery headaches, his sensitive system. She had 3,000 followers. She was building a following around her son's illness. An illness she was creating. She called it, in her own words, in a post from 4 months ago, our health journey. I sat with that for a long time. Dennis waited, the way good men wait when they've handed you something devastating. He didn't fill the silence. He just let me have it. She needed him sick, I said finally. It wasn't a question. It appears that way, Dennis said. The account is monetized. She had brand partnerships pending. 2 of them specifically required ongoing documentation of a child with a chronic condition. I thought about Marcus, in his dinosaur socks, swinging his legs on the exam table, tracing the hand-washing poster with his eyes. I thought about that teacher's note sitting in his backpack for 2 weeks, unanswered. I thought about the word obstacle, which I'd used on Monday, and which I now understood I had gotten exactly backwards. He hadn't been an obstacle to her life. He'd been a product in it. Does Raphael know about the account? I asked. Not as far as I can tell. The username is different. The profile photo is just Marcus. I paid for the coffee. I tucked the folder under my arm. Dennis, I said, I need everything documented. every receipt, every post, every timestamp. Already in motion, he said. I called Patricia Okafor from the parking lot. She'd already reviewed the medical report and the notes I'd faxed her Monday morning. Frank, she said, this is Munchausen, by proxy. DCFS is going to want to move quickly once they have this documentation. You need your son ready before this becomes a formal investigation, because the moment it does, everything speeds up. How much time do I have? Realistically, get him tonight. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home. I bought the ingredients for red beans and rice, the meal my mother made for every hard conversation this family has ever had, the meal I made for Raphael when his mother died, when his first business failed, when his best friend moved out of state and he didn't know how to say it hurt him. Raphael doesn't know it's a ritual. But every time life has handed him something too heavy to carry standing up, there has been red beans and rice on the table when he sat down with it. Some things you do without explaining. You just do them. He came over that evening at 7. I'd asked him to stop by on his way home from the office, told him I just wanted to see him, which was true in every way that mattered. He came in the door looking the way he'd been looking for months, that stretched thin look, and hugged me in the entryway, and said something smelled good. Where's Marcus? Asleep already. He had a big day. He sat down at the kitchen table, loosened his tie. Pop, what's going on? You've had that voice. Eat first. He gave me the look 35 years of that same look. The, you're being weird, but I'll allow it look, and he picked up his fork. We ate. I let him finish. I let him have seconds, let him have the sweet tea, and the quiet, and the kitchen light, and the last ordinary minutes he was going to have for a while. Then I stood up, and I put 3 things on the table in front of him. The medical report from Dr. Torres, Dennis's folder, pharmacy records on top, and a printed screenshot of Celeste's private account Marcus's face as the profile photo, the words "Our Health Journey" in the bio. I sat back down. I didn't say a word. I let the evidence talk. Raphael picked up the medical report. He read slowly. I watched his face, not bracing for an explosion, but watching for the moment when it stopped being information and started being reality. It happened somewhere in the second paragraph. His jaw didn't tighten. His eyes didn't go red. His face went the way a door goes when the lock finally catches. A quiet, final, definitive sound that you feel more than hear. He set it down, picked up the pharmacy records, read those, set them down, picked up the screenshot and stared at it. He stared at it for a long time. Then he set it face down on the table and he said, "Excuse me." He stood up, walked to the back of the house, and closed the bathroom door. I sat there. I refilled my tea. I listened to the refrigerator hum. I looked at the folder on the table, and I thought about a 7-year-old boy who had been carrying headaches to breakfast every morning and had been told they were nothing worth bothering anyone about. He was in there for 9 minutes. When he came back, his eyes were clear. His voice was steady. He sat down across from me, and he looked at the screenshot without picking it up again. "How long?" he asked. "At minimum, 7 months based on the pharmacy records. Possibly longer. And Marcus doesn't know. He knows he doesn't feel well. He doesn't know why." Raphael nodded. His hands were flat on the table. "Does he know we're fixing it?" "Not yet, but we're going to tell him." There was a silence. Then, "How long have you known?" "Since Sunday." He looked up. "You've been sitting on this since Sunday. I needed it airtight, son. I needed you to see it and have nothing left to explain away." He was quiet for a moment. Then he exhaled, slow and long, and he looked at the folder, and then at me. "You built the whole case before you knocked on the door." 31 years of troubleshooting, I said. "Some habits stay with you." He pulled out his phone. "I need Patricia Okafor's number." I gave it to him. He called her, right there at the kitchen table, red beans and rice still on the plates, and he spoke to her for 22 minutes with the kind of focus that told me the man inside the husband had been waiting for something real to do. He wasn't falling apart. He was moving. That was my son. That was always my son. He just needed someone to clear the smoke first. He didn't go home that night. He slept in his old room, down the hall from Marcus, and in the morning I heard them in the kitchen before I got up, Marcus's voice asking questions about something. Raphael's voice answering everyone. He spent the next 3 days doing exactly what Patricia told him to do. He moved his financial accounts. He photographed the home office documents. He called the school and spoke to Marcus's teacher, the one who'd written that note, and she told him things that had been sitting in her observations for months, waiting for someone to ask. He did all of it quietly, without a single, unnecessary word to Celeste. On the fourth day, a Friday, he waited until Marcus was at school. I drove him myself, walked him in, made sure he was settled, and then Raphael went to the house in Naperville, and he sat down across from Celeste at the kitchen island, the marble one she'd picked out herself, the one she'd photographed for the account with the caption "Where Healing Happens." She was drinking coffee when he walked in. She smiled. Normal Friday morning. He put the medical report on the counter in front of her. She looked at it. She looked at him. The smile dissolved in real time, and then she started talking immediately, which was her mistake, because she went straight to explaining instead of asking what he already knew. "Raphael, I can explain this. She had symptoms, and the doctor was being dismissive, so I was just trying to manage." He put the pharmacy records on the counter. She stopped. He put the screenshot on top, the profile, the 3,000 followers, the brand, partnerships, our health, journey. She went completely still. "I worked every hour of the last 4 years," he said, and his voice was quiet, the quietest I've ever heard it, "so that you and Marcus would have everything you needed. I trusted you with our son." He picked up his keys from the counter. "You used him." "Raphael, please, you don't understand what it was like being home alone." "I understand exactly what it was like," he said. "Marcus told my father his head hurt every morning, and you told him it wasn't worth bothering anyone about." He walked to the door. She said his name twice. He didn't turn around. "I'm going to tell you how it ended, and I'm going to tell it to you the way it actually happened, not the way it looks in movies." DCFS opened a formal investigation within 48 hours of Patricia filing the documentation. Dr. Torres's report went on the record. The pharmacy purchase history: 7 distinct pharmacies, 17 months of receipts. By the time Dennis had the full picture, went on the record. The private social media account, with its documented strategy of cultivating Marcus's illness for monetization, went on the record. The phrase Patricia used in front of the judge was medical child abuse. It is a real thing. It has a legal definition. And it turns out it has a paper trail. If someone looks, Raphael was granted full emergency custody within 2 weeks of filing. Marcus came to stay with him permanently, and for the first 2 months, he had a standing Saturday appointment with a child therapist named Dr. Gwen, who specialized in exactly this kind of thing. He doesn't have the headaches anymore. He went to the Science Museum 3 times in the fall. The criminal charges, child endangerment and medical fraud related to the brand partnerships, were filed by the county DA 4 months after Raphael walked out that door. The legal process moves at its own pace, the way large things always do, but it moves. I have learned to trust the weight of evidence more than the speed of outcomes. The account went quiet the week the investigation opened. The brand partnerships dissolved. The profile that had called itself Our Health Journey, that had turned a little boy's pain into content, simply stopped posting. 3,000 people had been watching and never knew what they were watching. Here's what I want you to take away from this, friends and family. Not the legal outcome, not the details of what one person did wrong. I want you to take away what Marcus said on that Saturday morning at my kitchen table, stirring his cereal, talking about eye pain like it was just a fact of life he'd learned to carry. He said, "Mom says it's not worth bothering the doctor for something small." 7 years old. He had been taught to minimize his own pain. He had been taught that how he felt was not worth anyone's time. And he had accepted that lesson the way children accept the things they're taught completely, without question, because the person teaching him was the person he trusted most. If a child tells you something hurts, believe them. If a child tells you something is wrong, believe them. If a child tells you the same thing is wrong every day and nobody seems to be listening, you be the one who listens. That's all I did. I listened to my grandson on a Saturday morning, and I let what he said mean what it actually meant. Pay attention to the children around you. They'll tell you everything, if you sit still long enough to hear it. And Marcus, if you're old enough to read this, someday your grandfather was paying attention. Every single day, I was paying attention. and I always will be. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who loves a child. Hit that like button, leave your thoughts down in the comments. I read every one. And subscribe if you haven't yet, because there are more stories where this one came from. Real ones. The kind that remind you what family is actually for. I'll see you on the next one. Sometimes the most important thing you'll ever do for someone you love is simply slow down and pay attention. Frank didn't have special powers, he just noticed a shrug instead of excitement, a headache mentioned too casually, a child who had learned to shrink his own pain because nobody made room for it. That kind of noticing is available to all of us, every single day. The children in your life are already telling you what they need. Make sure you're listening. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a meaningful moment of entertainment, while leaving behind something genuinely worth carrying. A reminder that love, at its best, looks a lot like paying attention.